At my wife's birthday dinner, my mother-in-law joked, if Emily had married anyone else except you, our lives would have been so much better. Everyone laughed except me. I just smiled and said, challenge accepted. That night, I moved out and canceled every card, house payment, and car payment I'd been covering for the past 5 years. Within 2 weeks, their cars got repossessed, the bank started foreclosure proceedings, and they couldn't even buy groceries. At 2 a.m., they showed up at my apartment door, my wife sobbing, her mother behind her looking defeated, begging me to come back. You know that moment when someone says something that cuts so deep, you can actually feel your world shift? Well, let me tell you about mine. It happened on a Tuesday night in October, at what should have been a celebration. Instead, it became the night I decided to teach some very important people a lesson they'd never forget. Picture this, Emily's 32nd birthday dinner at Romano's, that fancy Italian place downtown with the checkered tablecloths and candles that flickered just enough to make everyone look mysterious. The whole family was there, Emily's parents, her sister Belle with her husband Oscar, even crazy Uncle Hugo who always tells the same 3 stories about his days as a merchant marine. I'd been running late because of a conference call that dragged on forever, something about quarterly projections that couldn't wait until morning, apparently. When I finally rushed in, still loosening my tie, everyone was already deep into their second round of drinks. Emily looked radiant in that blue dress I'd bought her for our anniversary, her dark hair catching the candlelight just right. There he is. Emily's father, George Sterling, boomed from across the table. The man of the hour. Well, technically Emily's the woman of the hour, but you know what I mean. I slid into the empty chair next to Emily, kissing her cheek and murmuring an apology. She squeezed my hand under the table, that little gesture that always made everything okay. Or so I thought. The evening started pleasantly enough. We ordered our usual, Emily got the seafood risotto, I went with the lamb special. The conversation flowed like good wine, touching on everything from Belle's new art gallery venture to Uncle Hugo's latest fishing expedition. For a moment, I actually relaxed. This was my family, after all. These people had welcomed me with open arms when Emily and I got married 5 years ago. But here's the thing about families, sometimes they forget you're listening. It was Emily's mother, Pearl Sterling, who delivered the blow. We'd just finished singing Happy Birthday, and Emily was cutting into her chocolate cake, the one I'd special ordered from that bakery across town because I knew it was her favorite. Everyone was laughing about something Belle had said about the candles being a fire hazard, and the mood was light, comfortable. That's when Pearl raised her wine glass, her eyes twinkling with what I initially mistook for affection. She said, her voice carrying that particular brand of maternal authority that could silence a room, if Emily had married anyone else except you, our lives would have been so much better. The laughter that followed hit me like a physical force. George nearly choked on his tiramisu. Belle snorted wine through her nose. Even Emily giggled, while cutting another slice of cake. Uncle Hugo slapped the table so hard the water glasses jumped. Everyone laughed except me. I just sat there, fork halfway to my mouth, watching my wife's family find enormous humor in the idea that I was somehow the worst possible choice for their daughter. The worst possible choice for their sister. The worst possible choice, period. Have you ever had one of those moments where time seems to slow down, and you can hear your own heartbeat in your ears? Where you become hyper-aware of every detail around you, the way the candlelight reflects off the silverware, the distant hum of kitchen activity, the couple at the next table arguing quietly about their mortgage. That's where I was. Suspended in this bubble of crystal-clear awareness while my wife's family continued to chuckle at what they clearly considered a harmless joke. But here's what they didn't know, what none of them knew, because why would they? I'd never felt the need to advertise it. For the past 5 years, ever since Emily and I got married, I'd been quietly, consistently, methodically taking care of everyone in that room. George's car payment? Mine. The monthly check was automatically deducted from my account every 15th of the month. Pearl's mortgage after George lost his job 3 years ago? Also mine. I'd taken over those payments without a word of complaint, just a quiet conversation with Emily about family loyalty and doing what was right. Belle's art gallery that she was so excited about? Guess who'd co-signed the lease and been covering the monthly rent shortfalls for 8 months running? Uncle Hugo's boat repairs after that storm last spring? The credit card Emily used for her shopping trips, the insurance on both their cars, even the monthly payments on Pearl's precious china cabinet, all of it flowing from my accounts like water from a broken dam. But apparently, according to the woman whose mortgage I'd been paying, their lives would have been so much better without me. I set down my fork, picked up my water glass, and took a long, deliberate sip. The laughter was finally dying down, and Pearl was starting to look a little sheepish, probably remembering belatedly that the target of her joke was sitting right there. "Pearl," I said, my voice perfectly calm, perfectly measured. "That's actually really funny." She brightened, clearly relieved that I was taking it well. "Oh, I'm just teasing, Henry. You're a good sport." I smiled. Not a fake smile, mind you, a genuine, honest-to-goodness smile that came from somewhere deep in my chest. Because suddenly, with perfect clarity, I knew exactly what I was going to do. "Actually," I said, raising my own glass in a mock toast, challenge accepted. Everyone laughed again, thinking I was playing along with the joke. Emily reached over and squeezed my shoulder affectionately. Belle raised her glass to mine. Even Pearl looked pleased with herself for creating such a moment of family bonding. But you know what? Sometimes the most dangerous words are the ones spoken with a smile. The rest of the dinner passed in a pleasant blur. I was charming, attentive, the perfect son-in-law and husband. I complimented Pearl's new haircut, asked George about his golf game, and listened with apparent fascination to Uncle Hugo's latest maritime adventure. I even insisted on picking up the check, a gesture that earned me approving nods all around. "See?" Pearl whispered to Emily as we gathered our coats. "This is why we love him. He's so good to us." Emily beamed at me, clearly proud of how graciously I'd handled her mother's teasing. She had no idea that I'd just made the most important decision of our marriage. That night, back at our house, the house I'd been paying for, in the neighborhood I'd chosen, with the furniture I'd bought, Emily curled up against me in bed, tracing lazy patterns on my chest with her finger. "Thank you for being such a good sport tonight," she murmured. "Mom doesn't mean anything by it, She just has a weird sense of humor." I kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo. "I know, sweetheart. Don't worry about it." But I was worrying about it. Or rather, I was planning around it. You see, the thing about being the financial backbone of an entire extended family is that you learn things. You become intimately familiar with everyone's dependencies, their weak points, their absolute necessities versus their luxuries. You know exactly where every dollar goes and what happens when those dollars stop flowing. And after 5 years of quiet, unacknowledged generosity, I knew exactly how to make Pearl's wish come true. The next morning, while Emily was at her yoga class, I began what I came to think of as my liberation. It started with a simple phone call to our bank. "Hi, this is Henry Brooks. I need to speak to someone about removing myself from several automatic payments. Do you know how satisfying it is to cancel a car payment when you know the person has exactly 11 days before repossession? It's like defusing a bomb in reverse. Instead of preventing an explosion, you're carefully setting one up." George's BMW was first. That sleek, silver status symbol he loved so much would be gone by month's end. Then Pearl's mortgage, the one on the house where she'd raised Emily, the one with the beautiful garden and the wraparound porch where we'd spent countless Sunday afternoons. Belle's gallery rent. The insurance policies. The credit cards. One by one, I methodically removed myself from every financial obligation I'd voluntarily taken on for the Sterling family. It was like pulling threads from a tapestry, watching the whole beautiful picture slowly unravel. But here's the thing, I wasn't doing this in anger. I wasn't rage quitting or throwing a tantrum. This was calculated, deliberate, and strangely peaceful. I was simply taking Pearl's advice and removing myself from the equation to see if their lives really would be so much better. The moving truck came on Thursday. I'd rented a furnished apartment across town, nothing fancy, just a clean, quiet place with good lighting and space for my books. Emily was at work, so I left her a note on the kitchen counter, right next to the coffee maker I'd bought her for Christmas. "Emily, I've decided to take your mother's advice and see what life would be like if you'd married someone else. Consider this a temporary separation while we both figure out what we really want. All the bills are yours now, just like they would have been if you'd married that someone else your mother mentioned. The house payment is due on the 15th, car payments on the 20th. I'm sure you'll manage beautifully. I love you, but I need some space to think. Henry, P.S., tell your mother I said thank you for the suggestion." I'll admit, there was a certain poetry to it. Here I was, literally giving them exactly what Pearl had joked about wanting, a world where Emily had never married me. The only difference was, they were getting it 5 years too late to matter for their financial planning. The first few days were blissfully quiet. My phone stayed silent, Emily was probably too shocked to call, and the rest of the family was likely still processing what had happened. I used the time to settle into my new routine, to remember what it felt like to be responsible only for myself. Have you ever noticed how much lighter you feel when you're not carrying other people's problems? It's like taking off a backpack you didn't realize was weighing you down. On Sunday morning, I was making pancakes in my little kitchen when my phone finally rang. Emily's name flashed on the screen, and for a moment, I considered not answering. But curiosity won out. Henry? Her voice was small, confused. What's going on? Why did you leave? Why did you cancel? Everything? I told you in my note, I said calmly, flipping a pancake with perhaps more precision than strictly necessary. I'm giving your family exactly what your mother wanted, the chance to see how much better their lives would be without me. But Henry, this is crazy. Mom was just joking. Was she, though? I asked. Because everyone seemed to find it pretty hilarious. Even you were laughing. There was a long silence on the other end. I could practically hear the wheels turning in her head, probably for the first time really considering what my absence meant practically, financially. Henry, please. Just come home. We can talk about this. Oh, we will talk, I assured her. But first, let's see how this experiment plays out. Give it a couple of weeks. If your mother was right, you should all be noticeably happier by then. I hung up before she could respond. The pancakes were perfect, golden brown and fluffy. I ate them slowly, savoring each bite, while reading the newspaper I'd had delivered to my new address. Week 1 passed quietly. I went to work, came home to my peaceful apartment, read books I'd been meaning to get to for years. No family dinners to attend, no emergencies to solve, no last-minute requests for financial help. It was remarkably serene. But I knew the storm was building. By day 10, the first cracks began to show. Belle called, her voice tight with stress I'd never heard before. Henry, I don't know what's going on between you and Emily, but the gallery rent is overdue. The landlord is threatening eviction. I need to know if the payment is just late or if. It's not late, Belle, I said gently. It's discontinued. I'm no longer covering the gallery expenses. The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. But Henry, I can't afford the rent without you. The gallery isn't profitable yet. You know that. I do know that. I've known that for 8 months. But according to your mother, your lives would be so much better if Emily had married someone else. I'm just helping you all find out if she was right. This is insane. You can't just. I can, actually. And I am. Good luck with the gallery, Belle. I hope it works out. Another call ended. Another thread pulled from the tapestry. The car repossession started on day 12. George's BMW first, towed away on a Tuesday morning while he was inside drinking his coffee and reading the financial section. I wasn't there to see it, of course, but Emily called me 20 minutes later, sobbing. They took Dad's car, Henry. Right from the driveway. He doesn't understand what's happening. I imagine he's starting to understand now, I said. I was at my desk at work, reviewing quarterly reports, feeling oddly calm for someone whose wife was crying on the phone. Did he call the bank? Of course he called the bank. They told him the payment stopped 2 weeks ago. Henry, what have you done? What had I done? I'd taken their advice, that's what. I'd removed myself from their financial equation to see if their lives improved. So far, the results were illuminating. I've given your family exactly what they asked for, I told her. Freedom from the burden of being connected to me. Nobody asked for this. Actually, your mother specifically suggested it. At your birthday dinner. In front of everyone. And everyone thought it was hilarious. I could hear her crying harder now, and I'll admit, it tugged at something in my chest. 5 years of marriage doesn't just disappear because someone hurts your feelings. But I'd committed to this course of action, and I was curious to see where it led. Please, Henry. Just come home. We'll figure this out. We will figure this out, I agreed. But first, let's see how much better everyone's life gets without me in it. Your mother seemed so confident about the improvement. Day 14 brought the foreclosure notice. I didn't hear about it directly, I learned about it from my neighbor, Mrs. Hunter, who mentioned seeing a legal notice posted on that lovely house where your wife grew up. Pearl had lived in that house for 32 years. She'd raised 2 daughters there, hosted countless family gatherings, spent weekends in the garden planting roses and trimming hedges. It was her kingdom, her sanctuary, the physical manifestation of everything she'd built with George. And now it was being taken away. I should probably mention something here, something I hadn't told Emily or her family because, well, it never seemed relevant. My grandfather had been what you might call independently wealthy. Not rich enough to make headlines, but comfortable enough to leave his grandchildren with certain advantages. I'd been living well below my means for years, not out of necessity but out of choice. Which is to say, I could afford to carry the Sterling family's financial burdens indefinitely. I just no longer chose to. The calls started coming more frequently after the foreclosure notice. First Emily, then George, then Belle again. I let most of them go to voicemail, listening to the increasingly desperate messages during my lunch breaks. Henry, please, you have to help us understand what we did wrong. This is George. Son, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. Henry, it's Belle. The gallery is closing. 8 months of work, gone. Please call me back. But the call I was really waiting for, the one that would tell me the experiment was reaching its conclusion, that call didn't come until 2:17 a.m. on a Wednesday night, exactly 2 weeks after I'd moved out. I was awake anyway, reading in bed, when my phone buzzed. Emily's name on the screen, but this time I answered immediately. Henry? Her voice was raw, exhausted. We're outside your apartment. Can we please come up? I walked to my window and looked down at the street. There they were, illuminated by the streetlight, Emily in her pajamas and a coat, her hair unbrushed, her face streaked with tears. And behind her, Pearl Sterling, the woman who'd joked about their lives being better without me, looking smaller somehow, diminished. We? I asked, though I could see them both clearly. Mom's here with me. Henry, please. We need to talk. I could have said no. Could have told them to call during business hours, to make an appointment, to respect my space and my decision. But I'd been waiting 2 weeks for this moment, the moment when they finally understood what they'd lost. I'll be right down. I took my time getting dressed, running a comb through my hair, brushing my teeth. This was a moment that deserved to be approached with dignity, with intention. When I finally opened the building's front door, they were huddled together on the steps like refugees from their own lives. Emily looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. Henry, I'm so sorry. We're so sorry. Please, can we just talk? Pearl hadn't spoken yet, but I could see the defeat in her posture, the way she held herself like someone who'd just learned a very expensive lesson. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she was wearing clothes I'd never seen before, older things, probably pulled from the back of her closet. Of course we can talk, I said. Come on up. My apartment was small but comfortable. I'd furnished it simply, a good couch, a coffee table, built-in bookshelves lined with volumes I'd actually had time to read over the past 2 weeks. Emily looked around with obvious confusion, as if she couldn't quite believe this was where I'd been living. Would anyone like coffee? I asked, playing the gracious host. I just bought a new machine. Emily shook her head, but Pearl surprised me by nodding. That would be nice, thank you. While I prepared the coffee, they sat in silence on my couch. I could feel their eyes on me, could sense them trying to figure out how to begin this conversation. Finally, as I handed Pearl her mug, Emily spoke. Henry, what you've done. It's devastating. Dad lost his car. Mom might lose the house. Belle's gallery is closing. I don't understand how you could just turn off the money like that. I settled into my armchair, cradling my own coffee mug. I didn't turn off anything, Emily. I simply stopped paying for things that weren't my responsibility. But you've been paying for those things for years. I have, I agreed. Out of love. Out of respect. Out of a desire to be a good husband and a good son-in-law. But your mother made it very clear that my contributions weren't valued. In fact, she suggested that all of your lives would be actively improved by my absence. Pearl finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't mean it like that, Henry. It was just a joke. Was it? I asked. Because here's what I've learned over the past 2 weeks, jokes like that don't come from nowhere. They come from real feelings, real thoughts that people usually keep hidden. You felt safe enough to voice that particular sentiment because part of you, maybe a big part, actually believed it. I leaned forward, setting my coffee on the table between us. So I decided to test your theory. If Emily had married someone else, what would your lives look like? Well, now you know. Emily was crying again, but quietly this time. Henry, please. This isn't fair. We love you. Your family. Am I? I asked. Because family doesn't usually laugh when someone suggests they'd be better off without one of their members. Family doesn't make jokes about wishing someone had never joined them. Pearl set down her coffee with shaking hands. Henry, I don't know what to say. I was wrong. Completely, utterly wrong. These past 2 weeks have been hell. George is talking about selling his tools to make the mortgage payment. Belle is devastated about the gallery. And Emily. She gestured toward her daughter, who was curled up on my couch like a lost child. Emily hasn't slept in days. She keeps asking what she did wrong, why you left, how she can fix this. She loves you, Henry. We all love you. I was being stupid and careless with my words. Now, here's where you might expect me to relent. To accept their apologies and forgive the whole mess. After all, they'd learned their lesson, hadn't they? They understood now how much I'd been contributing, how integral I was to their comfortable existence. But I wasn't ready to forgive. Not yet. Pearl, I said carefully, do you remember what you said when I told you challenge accepted? She looked confused. No, I don't remember exactly. You said, this is why we love him. He's so good to us. You said it to Emily, right in front of me, like I was a convenient service provider you were pleased with rather than a member of your family. The memory seemed to hit her like a physical blow. Her face went pale, and she covered her mouth with her hand. That's not. I didn't mean. But you did mean it, I said. That's exactly how you see me, isn't it? As someone who's good to you. Someone who provides things. Someone whose value is measured by his utility rather than his worth as a person. Emily was staring at me now, and I could see understanding dawning in her eyes. Henry, that's not how I see you. Isn't it? I asked gently. When was the last time you asked me how I felt about covering your father's car payment? When did we last discuss whether I minded paying your mother's mortgage? Have you ever once thanked me for supporting Belle's business dreams? The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Because of course they hadn't asked. Of course they hadn't discussed it. They'd simply accepted my generosity as their due, the way you accept that the sun rises every morning without thinking to thank it. You want to know the really interesting part? I continued. I never minded paying for those things. I actually enjoyed being able to help, being able to make your lives easier and more comfortable. But I minded being taken for granted. I minded being seen as an ATM with legs. And I really minded being publicly mocked for my contributions to your family's well-being. Pearl was crying now, not the dramatic tears of someone performing grief, but the quiet, steady tears of genuine remorse. How do we fix this, Henry? How do we make this right? And there it was, the question I'd been waiting for. The admission that there was something to fix, something that had been broken long before I'd moved out. That's an interesting question, I said. Because fixing this isn't just about me moving back home and resuming the payments. Fixing this means fundamentally changing how this family sees me, values me, treats me. I stood up and walked to my window, looking out at the city lights. Emily, do you remember our wedding day? What you promised me in your vows? Yes. To love, honor, and cherish you. In good times and bad, for richer or poorer. For richer or poorer, I repeated. That means we're supposed to be partners, equals. It doesn't mean I'm supposed to be the family's charitable foundation while you all laugh about how much better off you'd be without me. I turned back to face them. So here's what's going to happen. I'm willing to come home, and I'm willing to resume helping with the family's expenses. But things are going to be different. Emily sat up straighter, hope flickering in her eyes. What do you mean? I mean we're going to have a family meeting. All of us, you, me, your parents, Belle and Oscar. We're going to sit down and honestly discuss everyone's financial situation, who needs help with what, and how we can structure that help in a way that's sustainable and respectful. Pearl nodded eagerly. Yes, absolutely. Whatever you want. I want acknowledgement, I said. I want to be valued for more than just my paycheck. I want to be included in family decisions that affect me. And I want to never, ever hear another joke about how much better off you'd all be without me. Never, Pearl said quickly. Henry, I swear to you, I will never make another comment like that. I understand now how cruel it was, how thoughtless. I'm ashamed of myself. Emily stood up and crossed to where I was standing. And I'm ashamed that I laughed. I should have defended you. I should have shut it down immediately. She reached for my hands, and I let her take them. Henry, these 2 weeks have been the worst of my life. Not because of the money problems, though those are scary, but because I lost my husband. I lost my best friend. I've been walking around like half a person. Do you know what it's like to watch someone you love realize they've taken you for granted? It's heartbreaking and satisfying at the same time, like watching someone finally understand a lesson they needed to learn but wish they hadn't had to. I've missed you too, I admitted. But Emily, we can't go back to the way things were. I won't be the family's silent benefactor anymore. If I'm going to help, I want to be consulted. I want to be respected. I want to be seen as a partner, not just a provider. Yes, she said immediately. Yes, absolutely. Whatever you need. Pearl stood up then, her coffee forgotten. Henry, may I say something? I nodded. I raised Emily to be independent, To be strong, to never rely on anyone else for her happiness or security. But somewhere along the way, I think I forgot that marriage is supposed to be a partnership. I started seeing you as someone who was there to make our lives easier rather than someone who was building a life with my daughter. She took a shaky breath. These past 2 weeks, watching George try to figure out how to make the mortgage payment, watching Belle lose her dream, watching Emily fall apart. I've realized that you weren't just paying for things. You were holding our family together. And instead of being grateful, instead of recognizing what a gift that was, I made a stupid, thoughtless joke that nearly cost us everything. The woman standing in my living room bore little resemblance to the confident matriarch who delivered that cutting comment 2 weeks ago. This Pearl was humbled, frightened, genuinely remorseful. I can't take back what I said, she continued. But I can spend the rest of my life making sure you know how valued you are, how grateful we are to have you in our family. If you'll let me. And there it was, the apology I'd been waiting for, the acknowledgement I'd needed. But more than that, it was a recognition of my place in their family that went beyond my bank account. I looked at Emily, then at Pearl, these two women who meant so much to me despite everything that had happened. All right, I said finally. Let's go home and figure this out. The relief on their faces was immediate and overwhelming. Emily threw herself into my arms, and I held her tight, breathing in that familiar scent of her hair, feeling the tension leave my body for the first time in 2 weeks. But, I said, pulling back to look at her seriously, we do this right. Family meeting this Sunday. Everyone's cards on the table. No more secrets, no more assumptions, no more taking anyone for granted. Done, Emily said immediately. Pearl nodded vigorously. Whatever you want, Henry. Whatever it takes. The drive back to our house was quiet but not uncomfortable. Emily held my hand across the center console, and Pearl sat in the back seat, occasionally sniffling but otherwise silent. When we pulled into our driveway, the driveway I'd been paying for, leading to the house I'd been maintaining, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief at coming home. Satisfaction at having made my point. But also a new understanding of my own worth, my own power, my own importance to the people I loved. That Sunday, we gathered around the dining room table where this whole mess had started. George looked older somehow, the stress of the past 2 weeks etched into new lines around his eyes. Belle was subdued, her usual artistic energy dimmed by the loss of her gallery. Oscar seemed nervous, probably wondering if his own comfortable existence was about to be scrutinized. But it was Pearl who surprised me the most. She'd prepared an agenda, an actual, written agenda, outlining every family expense I'd been covering, every debt I'd been servicing, every financial responsibility I'd quietly shouldered. I spent the week documenting everything, she said, sliding copies across the table to everyone. I wanted to make sure we all understood exactly how much Henry has been contributing to our family's well-being. The numbers were staggering when laid out like that. Over 5 years, I'd contributed nearly $250,000 to the Sterling family's various needs and wants. Car payments, mortgage assistance, business investments, emergency repairs, medical bills, insurance premiums. It was a comprehensive catalog of my quiet generosity. George whistled low under his breath. Son, I had no idea it was this much. That was rather the point, I said. I didn't want it to feel like charity or obligation. I wanted to help because I loved Emily and, by extension, all of you. Belle was staring at her copy of the list with something approaching shock. Henry, the gallery. You kept it running for 8 months when it wasn't making money. Why didn't you ever say anything about the losses? Because you were excited about it, I said simply. Because it made you happy. Because supporting families sometimes means supporting their dreams, even when those dreams are expensive. Emily reached for my hand. So what happens now? How do we move forward? I'd been thinking about this question for 2 weeks, and I had an answer ready. Now we make agreements instead of assumptions. If someone needs help, they ask directly and we discuss it as a family. If I'm going to contribute to something, I want to be included in the decisions about it. And if anyone ever feels like I'm not pulling my weight or that their life would be better without me, they tell me privately instead of making jokes about it in public. And if they don't? Oscar asked quietly. It was the first thing he'd said all evening. I smiled at him, the same smile I'd given Pearl at the birthday dinner. Then I'll be happy to test their theory again. The family meeting lasted 3 hours. We restructured everything, payment schedules, decision-making processes, communication protocols. I agreed to continue helping with the essential expenses but with new conditions, monthly family financial meetings, joint decision-making on major purchases, and honest conversations about what everyone could and couldn't afford. Belle would keep her gallery, but with a proper business plan and monthly reviews. George would get his car back, but we'd negotiate more reasonable payment terms. Pearl would keep her house, but she'd also get a part-time job to contribute to the mortgage. Most importantly, we established what I called the appreciation protocol. Instead of my contributions being invisible and assumed, they would be acknowledged and discussed. Not obsessively, not constantly, but regularly enough that everyone understood the scope and value of what was being shared. Was it a perfect solution? No. Did it completely heal the hurt I'd felt at that birthday dinner? Not entirely. But it was a start, a foundation for building something better than what we'd had before. 6 months later, I was sitting in the same restaurant, at the same table, celebrating Emily's 33rd birthday. The guest list was identical, but the atmosphere was completely different. George had insisted on picking up the check, even though I'd offered. Belle brought homemade dessert from a recipe she'd learned in a cooking class she was taking with the money she'd saved by finally turning a profit at the gallery. And Pearl? Pearl raised her glass for a toast, but this time, her words were different. To Henry, she said, her voice clear and strong, for teaching us that family isn't just about blood or marriage. It's about choice, and respect, and understanding that love without appreciation is just taking advantage of someone's kindness. Everyone raised their glasses, and this time, the sentiment was genuine. No jokes at anyone's expense, no thoughtless comments, no assumptions about anyone's contributions or value. And to Emily, I added, raising my own glass, for marrying exactly the right person at exactly the right time. The laughter that followed was warm, inclusive, genuine. And as I looked around the table at these people I'd chosen to love, who had finally learned to value that choice, I realized that Pearl had been right about one thing. Their lives were better now. But not because Emily had married someone else. They were better because they'd learned to appreciate who she'd actually married. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't about destroying what someone has. Sometimes, it's about teaching them to value what they already have before they lose it forever. And as for the challenge Pearl had so carelessly issued? Well, let's just say I'd accepted it, completed it, and won it in ways she'd never expected. After all, the best challenges are the ones where everyone learns something valuable, even if the lesson comes with a very expensive price tag. But that's a story for another day. What matters is that we all learn to see each other, really see each other, instead of just assuming we understood what everyone was worth. And Emily? Emily never laughed at another joke at my expense again. Because she finally understood that the man she'd married wasn't just good to her family. He was good for her family. And there's a difference between those two things that's worth about $250,000 and a whole lot of respect. Trust me on that one. You know what happened next? Life got interesting in ways I hadn't expected. George found a job, his first real employment in 3 years. Turns out, when you're facing foreclosure, your resume suddenly becomes a lot more flexible. He started working at a local hardware store, and you know what? He loved it. Absolutely loved talking to customers about power tools and garden supplies, sharing decades of experience with weekend warriors and ambitious homeowners. I forgot how good it feels to earn a paycheck, he told me one evening while we were grilling burgers in my backyard. I forgot how good it feels to contribute instead of just existing. Pearl took a position at the local library, part-time, but steady. She'd always been a voracious reader, and suddenly she was helping other people discover books, organizing reading programs for children, managing the community bulletin board. The woman who'd spent 3 years feeling useless while I paid her bills was now getting up every morning with purpose. I should have done this years ago, she confessed to Emily during one of our new monthly family dinners. I let your father's unemployment become my excuse to stop living my own life. Belle's gallery transformation was perhaps the most dramatic. Faced with actual financial pressure, she stopped treating it like an expensive hobby and started running it like a business. She diversified beyond just displaying art, she added classes, workshops, even corporate team building events. Within 6 months, she was not only profitable but expanding. Desperation is an amazing motivator, she laughed during our quarterly financial review meeting. Yes, we instituted those too. Turns out I'm actually pretty good at business when the alternative is losing everything I've worked for. But the real change was in Emily. My wife, who'd been coasting through life on the assumption that someone else would always handle the difficult things, suddenly became actively engaged in our shared future. She started asking questions about our investments, our long-term goals, our retirement planning. She took a financial planning course at the community college. I realized I'd been letting you carry all the responsibility, she told me one night as we walked through the neighborhood we'd chosen together. Not just the money part, but the planning part, the worrying part, the making sure everything works part. That wasn't fair to you. The most telling moment came 8 months after that infamous birthday dinner. We were back at Romano's, same table, same family, but celebrating George's 65th birthday this time. The conversation was lively, full of updates about everyone's work, plans for Belle's gallery expansion, Pearl's excitement about a new literacy program she was developing at the library. At one point, Uncle Hugo raised his glass and said, "You know, George, if you'd never lost that old job, none of these good things would have happened. Sometimes life knows what it's doing." Everyone chuckled, but then Pearl did something that made my chest tight with emotion. She immediately looked at me, checking my face, making sure I was okay with the joke. When she saw I was smiling, genuinely smiling this time, she relaxed and joined the laughter. That tiny moment, that split-second consideration for my feelings, told me more about how things had changed than any apology or grand gesture could have. Later that night, as Emily and I were getting ready for bed, she asked me something that surprised me. "Do you ever regret it? The way you handled everything?" I thought about it seriously. "Do you mean do I regret teaching your family to value what they had? I mean, do you regret being so calculating about it? So strategic? Some people would have just had a big fight and gotten it over with. Would that have worked?" I asked. She considered this, brushing her teeth thoughtfully. "Probably not. We would have apologized, promised to do better, and then gradually fallen back into the same patterns. This way." She rinsed and looked at me in the mirror. "This way, we had to actually live with the consequences of our attitudes. We had to feel what life was like without you before we could understand what life was like with you. And that, right there, is why I'm telling you this story. Because sometimes the kindest thing you can do for people you love is to let them experience the natural consequences of their choices. Sometimes the most loving response to being taken for granted is to give people the space to miss you." Would I recommend my approach to everyone in a similar situation? Maybe not. It was risky. I could have lost my marriage, my family, everything I cared about. But sometimes, when words aren't working, when conversations aren't changing anything, when you're drowning in other people's assumptions about your motivations and your worth, sometimes you have to take dramatic action to shift the entire dynamic. The Sterling family learned that their lives weren't better without me, they were measurably, demonstrably worse. And more importantly, they learned why that was true. Not just because of the money, but because I'd been a partner, a contributor, a foundation they'd built their comfortable lives upon without ever acknowledging the construction. These days, when people ask me for relationship advice, I tell them this: teach people how to treat you not just with your words, but with your actions. Show them what your presence is worth by occasionally demonstrating what your absence costs. Just make sure you're prepared for both possible outcomes. Because Pearl was wrong about their lives being better without me, but she could have been right. And I had to be ready to live with that possibility. Fortunately for all of us, she wasn't right. She was just grateful to finally understand the difference. But let me tell you about the conversation that really sealed the deal for me, the one that convinced me I'd made the right choice and how I handled everything. It happened about a year later, during what had become our tradition of monthly family game nights. We were playing Monopoly, ironic, I know, and Pearl was losing spectacularly. She'd mortgaged everything she owned and was about to land on my hotel-loaded boardwalk when she suddenly stopped moving her piece and looked up at me. "Henry," she said, "can I ask you something personal?" The whole table went quiet. Emily paused in counting her money, Belle stopped arranging her properties by color, and George actually looked up from the community chest card he'd been studying. "Sure," I said, though I was curious about what could possibly be so serious during a board game. "Were you angry with us? I mean, really angry? During those 2 weeks?" It was such an unexpected question that I had to think about it seriously. Was I angry? Looking back, I realized the answer was more complicated than I'd initially thought. "You know what's strange?" I said, moving my piece to safety and buying another railroad. "I wasn't angry, exactly. I was disappointed. And maybe a little hurt. But mostly, I was curious." "Curious about what?" "About whether you all really believed what you were saying. Whether my presence in this family was actually valued or just tolerated. Whether Emily had married a partner or what would you call it? A convenient solution to her family's financial problems." Emily looked stricken. "Henry, you know that's not." "I know that now," I interrupted gently. "But I didn't know it then. And the only way to find out was to remove myself from the equation and see what happened." Pearl nodded slowly. "Like a science experiment." "Exactly like a science experiment. Hypothesis: the Sterling family would be happier and more successful without Henry Brooks. Method: remove Henry Brooks from all family financial obligations and observe results. Conclusion: I gestured around the table, where everyone was now contributing to family game night instead of just attending it. Well, you all wrote the conclusion yourselves. Oscar, who'd been quietly arranging his property cards, suddenly spoke up. I have to admit, I was terrified you were going to do the same thing to me. We all looked at him in surprise. Oscar was usually the quiet one, content to let Belle handle the social aspects of family gatherings. What do you mean? Belle asked. Well, I've been letting you handle all our social obligations with your family. All the gift giving, the remembering of birthdays, the emotional labor of maintaining relationships. I never thanked Henry directly for helping with the gallery, never acknowledged what he was doing for all of us. I just let Belle handle it and assumed that was enough. He turned to me with something approaching embarrassment. After watching what happened when you withdrew your support, I realized I'd been just as guilty of taking you for granted. Just in different ways. This was fascinating to me. I'd never considered how my actions might ripple outward, how other people might examine their own behavior in relationships as a result of what they'd witnessed. So what did you do about it? Emily asked her brother-in-law. I started being more intentional about expressing appreciation. Not just to Henry, but to Belle, to all of you. I realized I'd been coasting through family relationships the same way everyone had been coasting through their relationship with Henry. Belle reached over and squeezed his hand. He started writing thank you notes, she said with obvious affection. Actual handwritten notes for things I'd done. It was the sweetest thing. It's amazing how much effort it actually takes to maintain relationships properly, George added. I never realized how much work Emily was doing to keep our family connected until I started trying to do some of it myself. And there it was, the ripple effect I hadn't anticipated. My little experiment in family dynamics had apparently inspired everyone to examine their own patterns of giving and taking, their own assumptions about who owed what to whom. The funniest part, Pearl said, collecting the dice for her turn, is that I spent 3 years complaining about feeling useless after George lost his job. But I'd created my own uselessness by letting everyone else handle everything important. The moment I had to step up and contribute, I remembered who I used to be before I became just someone's mother-in-law who got taken care of. She rolled the dice and moved her piece, landing safely on free parking. Sometimes we need someone to stop enabling our helplessness before we can remember our own strength. Emily was studying her husband with new eyes now. Is that what you were doing? Forcing us to remember our own strength? I was forcing you to choose, I corrected. Between the comfortable fiction that I was optional and the uncomfortable truth that I was integral. Between taking me for granted and actually valuing what I brought to your lives. And we chose wrong initially, Belle said quietly. You chose unconsciously, I replied. Which is different from choosing wrong. You'd never really thought about it before because you'd never had to. I made sure you had to. The game continued, but the conversation had shifted into territory that felt significant, meaningful. These weren't just polite family exchanges anymore, these were real people having honest discussions about power, dependency, gratitude, and love. That's when I knew, with absolute certainty, that my 2-week experiment had been worth every uncomfortable moment, every difficult conversation, every tear shed in its aftermath. Because we'd all learned something invaluable about the difference between being wanted and being needed, between being convenient and being cherished. And Pearl? She never made another joke at my expense. Not because she was afraid of the consequences, but because she genuinely understood now that every family needs someone willing to be the foundation. She just hadn't realized, until she almost lost it, that I'd been volunteering for that role all along.